Okay, Angela, I think you can get started. We'll let people filter in as we do our intros.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Cavanaugh, the Executive Director of New Jersey Chapter of CAI, and I'd like to welcome all of you for attending today and thank our also partners, the Board of Directors, and our CAI team for today's program. I'm now going to turn it over to Steve Roderick for the Membership Committee. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Angela. My name is Steve Roderick, and I am a proud member of the CAI New Jersey Membership Committee. I just wanted to offer a friendly reminder to ensure that your membership does not lapse. So if you're coming up on your renewal date, please be sure to renew so you can take advantage of all the benefits of being a CAI member. If your community or the community you manage is not yet a member, reach out to me or Robin. You can email her directly with any board member updates, and we can make those adjustments and changes as boards change too, or if you need to add onto your current roster. So we have a lot of exciting things coming up this summer and fall. For homeowners and managers, be sure to register for the upcoming roundtable discussions, which have some great topics, including ants and critters creeping in, emergency planning and preparing for the big storm. Also being discussed, best practices, contracts, ADR processes, and protecting your association. Also, we're going to do some asphalt repair. Remember, these are free for members to attend. So register on our website for our next Wednesday webinar on August 18th, featuring Ansel, Grimm, and Aaron. We'll be talking about emotional support animals, and DW Smith and Associates will be covering construction management and the importance of using an engineering firm. Don't forget, our beach party will be September 17th at Martell's. That's my personal favorite. And of course, our conference expo at iPlay on October 21st. Both events you don't want to miss. Committee signups are now open as well for the 2022 committees. Get your applications in and get involved. It might be the best way to grow in this industry. So our calendar of events is growing, so be sure to visit our website to register for upcoming programs and events and save the dates. We can't wait to see you.
Thanks, Steve.
No
So some housekeeping rules. Today, all of our participants will be muted. If you have questions, please use the question box and please let us know which speaker you would like the question directed to. Managers, if you need a certificate for credits, please email Jennifer at jennifer@CAI-NJ.org. And just to note that you must be in attendance for the entire presentation to receive that certificate. Today we'll be having first Harold Burlow from Denali Property Management. He will be speaking on budgets and financial planning for your association. Harold Burlow is the Director of Sales and Project Management for Denali Property Management. He has over 25 years of experience in managing all aspects of multifamily buildings in Hudson County. He has developed, built, and managed over $250 million worth of properties in his distinguished career, and has expertise in all building systems as well as administration, financial reporting, budgeting, and contracts and vendors oversight. Then we will have Jim Redemaker and Lauren Betanese from Rezkom Enterprises. Jim Redemaker is the founder and CEO of Rezkom Enterprises and has been providing on-site maintenance, porter, and carpentry services for community associations throughout New Jersey for over 32 years. They specialize in customized service contracts for on-site maintenance and porter services, in addition to offering a wide range of carpentry and construction services for construction defects and invasive inspection support. Jim formerly served as New Jersey Chapter President, as well as participating in several committees over his 20 years of membership with CAI. Lauren Betanese is the Director of Business Development for Rezkom Enterprises and has been with the company since 2014. She is also founding member and chair of the CAI-NJ FAST Committee, and Rezkom is a proud ultimate partner of the New Jersey chapter. Welcome, everyone. We're going to start off with Harold. Welcome, Harold.
Good morning, and thank you, or good afternoon, I guess, technically. I want to thank everybody at CAI for putting this together, inviting us to participate, so we get started. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on one second so that I can launch a, oops, there we go. There we go. Okay, oops, there we go. Excellent. So I hope everybody can see that. Today we're going to be talking about, and very briefly, unfortunately, it's a 30,000 foot view, budgeting, financial planning for your condominium association or homeowner association. I know it's unbelievable. It's only the first week of August, but we have already started planning for our associations that have the calendar year is their fiscal year, because we're going to start sending out budgets to our associations come September, at least draft budgets. So we're going to get into talking about that and what it is and why it's important. So just real quickly, some terms and definitions to explain. Very simply put, what is a budget? A budget is simply, it's a defined projection of the monies you need for specific items or expenses over a specific period of time. It's that simple. There are two types of budgets that every association needs, actually every business needs for that matter. An association, HOA are businesses, no doubt about it. But the two basic budgets are an operating budget and a capital budget. The brief explanation of the difference. Operating budget, as most people can understand, think of it as a household budget. How much money do I need this month, this quarter, this year to function, and where am I going to get those monies? And a capital budget is something slightly different, and a lot of times associations tend to give it short shrift. But I can tell you that a capital budget is the same thing. It's just for capital items at your association, which are things that have a useful life or depreciable life, and a roof, an elevator, a pool, etc. Those are examples of something like that. And it's a budget for those things. They occur less than annually, but they still need to be budgeted. Most of the time, a capital budget is developed by an engineer or an engineering firm. They put together a budget that usually runs out 25 to 30 years. It identifies all of your common capital elements. I just gave a few examples. It estimates their useful life. It estimates what, in today's dollars, it would be to replace that element. And then it provides a visual inspection of what that element looks like and estimates its useful life remaining. Again, a roof is a classic example that we'll be referring to throughout this. And that is that if you have a 20-year roof, and you are 14 years into it, well, let's take a simple example. You have $20,000 in today's dollars to replace that roof. You should be putting aside $1,000 a year in today's dollars so that at the end of 20 years, you have enough in your capital reserve account to replace that roof. If you're 14 years into it, well, you should already have $14,000 on hand and should be contributing the $1,000 for the next 6 years. Now, budgets are estimates. They are not guarantees. They are not certainties. They are projections. How do budgets, especially operating, and a lot of folks are going to be going through this, like I said, in the next couple of months. A good property management company will guide you, the board or boards, through the process. What is it based on? It's based on mostly history. What's your history? What have you done? And what do we reasonably project for the coming year based on the experience that we have, based on service contracts that have risers in them, et cetera, that we need to account for. So that's how it's developed, and like I said, the timing is critical to get started early, but we'll get to that in a second. Some basic terms to understand. Accrual versus cash. Again, we won't get into a whole long discussion of that, but very simply is accrual method of accounting is booking revenues when they are earned and booking expenses when they are due. It's different from cash. Cash is very simple. Most of us, operate our households on cash. Well, I deposited some monies today, so therefore it's in this month, and I wrote a check out last month, so that's it. We do it a little differently. The reason most associations and businesses are an accrual method is because it's much easier to track against your budget when you are booking these things on an accrual basis. Other terms to understand are basic, generally accepted accounting principle, financial reports, balance sheet, income statement, age receivables, age payables, cash journal, general ledger detail, bank reconciliations. If you are not receiving those on a monthly basis, you will not, and they are not accurate, You will not be able to properly make decisions for your business, your association. Other things to consider when developing budgets, again, fixed expenses versus variable. We just talked about how it's best to rely on experience and history when developing those. And then net zero budgets. All associations, in the state of New Jersey, are not for profit. They are designed to take in just the amount of money that they need to operate, and that does include contribution to capital reserves each year, but not a dollar more. Anyway, so what do? How do these budgets get developed? Start with, and I preach this all the time to our boards and our property managers. Start with the expenses first. What does that mean? That means is that, again, because you are a net zero budget, we're not interested in what the dues should be or what people can afford. What we are interested in first establishing is, what are your true expenses going to be for your operating budget? And again, we establish that through history, we establish that through experience, through looking forward, and we come up with best guesstimates. And again, just as use an example, not everything will be on an equal monthly basis. Snow removal is a classic example, right? Obviously, that's going to be weighted in the winter months, and it's going to be very little, hopefully, God willing, in July or August. And so we lay this out. So not only do we see what you will need on a monthly basis and over the course of the year, but when you will need it. What we then do is, once we've established that, and we understand what surpluses or shortages were from last year, we've identified, like I said, we've reached out to utility companies, we've reached out to the insurance company to see what, if any, estimated increases are expected. We identify the goals that have been stated from the board, and working in conjunction with the board. Hey, they'd like to do this repair, or they'd like to do this type of this service for the coming year. Once we establish all those things, we then back into what the actual revenue should be. It's a very simple formula. We take the total amount of expenses, we subtract any other sources of revenue. And sometimes people rent out clubhouses, they have other sources, they have a cell phone tower that they get rent on. But we subtract any of those other sources out, if any, and then we're left with how much money you need to raise from your ownership. Usually divided by the percentage interest in the common element, or a fixed amount if it's divided equally. And that is how much your dues should be. They may go up, they may go down, they may stay the same. What we tell people, what we guide our boards on is, always plan that you should have every year on your budget a percentage increase that would come close to equaling what the cost of living increase is, usually 2 to 3%. You should count on that. Unfortunately, we deal with too many associations that don't like to raise dues, especially this past year during a pandemic. But you let that go for too long, and then do the simple math without compounding. You don't raise dues for 5 years. All of a sudden, you're looking at a 15 or 17% increase in that sixth year. So we recommend not doing that. It saves the sticker shock. Important highlights to go over in talking about this. Again, start early. Don't forget to pay yourself first. One of the pieces of the budget, and we'll get into discussing why this is sometimes controversial, but one of the pieces of your budget, besides your utilities and your insurance premiums and your repairs expense, et cetera, is a contribution that you should be making every year to your reserve fund. Again, as we discussed, why it's so important to have that proper reserve balance. But that I can tell you from experience in dealing with underwriters and dealing with lenders, the minimum they want to see is 10% of your operating expenses set aside for your reserves each year. What that simply means is, if it costs $100 to operate your association for the year, they want to see you raise $110 from your ownership. $10 goes to reserves. That's minimum. I can tell you also from experience dealing with engineers and doing their capital reserve studies, it's usually much more than that is what the appropriate amount is. Again, track your progress throughout the year. This should be an ongoing thing that all boards and property managers should be doing. Making sure you have an income statement that tracks against your budget month to date and year to date, so that you can see at any given time how you're doing through that year, helps you better plan. And also, if you're in the middle of your year and there needs to be an adjustment up or down, it can be dealt with in a timely fashion. Make sure you're getting your timely and accurate reports. And again, if you haven't done a reserve study, please contact an engineering firm, contact your property manager who will put you in touch with the engineering firm so that this can be set up. Last thing we tell people is, look, that we know, especially during this last year, nobody wants to see their dues go up, right? Some folks are on fixed income, others have had trouble, lost their job, going through medical issues. We get it. The sooner you communicate to your ownership, the sooner you involve your ownership by having informational owners meetings, explaining the process, explaining the line items, answering the questions, the sooner you will, the better people will understand, and the sooner you'll get buy-in, especially if increases are coming. I'm not going to walk folks through this in too much detail, but I just wanted to show folks some sample budget and dues calculations. We use a worksheet. And very simply put, it's again, there's a proposed budget. I don't know if folks can see this. This is kind of small, but it lays out, as I mentioned, all the line items, right? What was in your current budget, what has actually been spent on an accrual basis through the period that we're reporting, what we project for the remainder of the year, what difference there has been in any of these line items, and then the last column here is projected budget that we for your next year. And again, the formula here, as you can see, I don't know if you can see it, this highlighted cell here is that what you need to raise from your dues. The simple formula in that spreadsheet, as I mentioned, is all your expenses less your other sources of revenue equals that total number. It then goes into a spreadsheet that calculates what the dues for each unit should be, measured against what they're currently paying, and if there's any change, both dollar amount and percentage-wise. Very handy spreadsheet. If you're not getting this currently from your property manager, contact us. Sample financial reports, as I mentioned, again, we're not going to get into drill down on too much on this, but it is your basic generally accepted accounting principle reports. Balance sheet, as you can see, we do fund accounting. We separate it out into your operating fund, your reserve fund, and other funds. And then, of course, your income statement, again, against budget. The columns that you want to see are month-to-date spending, month-to-date budget, month-to-date variance, and year-to-date spending, year-to-date budget, year-to-date variance. Very important to, and I tell folks, if you look at nothing else on a financial statement, look at the year-to-date variance, especially now we're in, July's reports are being done for our associations. Look at your year-to-date variance column. If there's a big number, positive or negative, it's a red flag. It's going to be an indicator, and it's going to have to be addressed in the coming year's budget. Just wanted to show folks real quickly a sample capital reserve study. This has been done by an engineering firm for a property, or actually we happen to manage. I've taken out the identifying information, but similar idea to the annual budget, but it runs it out, like I said, by identifying all the capital items, right? And it runs it out for a bunch of years. In this case, I believe it's 25 years. And it tells you what you should be spending on these things each year. That is important so that, again, as part of your financial reporting, it should be shared with all of your owners so they understand that just because you're putting aside monies into a reserve account doesn't mean that it's there for anything. It's there for specific items, and here's the list. So I know we've covered a lot of information in a relatively short period of time, and I don't want to take up too much time. We go into depth on all of these different charts, but I hope that gives you an overview of budget season that's coming up and what needs to be done and what the best practices are for doing it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to CAI.
Thank you, Harold. A lot of really important information. Thank you so much. We'll be taking questions at the end, so please, attendees, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box, and we will come back to Harold. Next up, we have from Rezkom Enterprises, James Rodemaker and Laura Badinese, and they will be telling us about the value of workmanship budgeting for the service you need. Welcome.
Thank you, Angela. Again, my name is Lauren Badney. I'm the Director of Business Development, and presenting with me today is Jim Rodemaker, who is the founder and CEO. I am going to share my screen with you just to give you a visual of what we're going to be going through. And hopefully this is a nice, oh, we're at the back, hold on. Hopefully this is a nice piggyback off of some of the things that Harold was just speaking about and things to consider when you're doing your budgets. All right. Perfect. So yeah, the title of our topic is the value of workmanship, budgeting for the service that you need. Jim and I felt that this was an important topic because it's extremely relevant always, but especially right now as demand and prices are high and availability and other things are low, unfortunately. And it's something that we're facing on a day-to-day basis with our clients. And so we felt it was important to kind of go over some of the things to consider. So the first item that we're going to talk about is don't just settle for the service that you can afford. We get calls all the time and they say, we really want to work with your company. You have a great reputation, or I've worked with you in the past, but this board does not have the money to afford you. And so they try to, the manager or the board member, they're trying to work with us, but in a lower capacity than what they really need for the community and for the service. And the type of service that we're providing is your ongoing maintenance and your janitorial and cleanup. Those are the things that people see every day. So it's really important to make sure that that's aligned. And it can't always be because you have a budget and however that came about, you're kind of stuck with for at least that year. So just some things to think about with that is to determine a realistic plan and the expectations based on the current budget restraints. So just because, we do this all the time, we're open to we customize every plan that we put together in terms of service for our customers. And the reason for that is that every community is different and everyone's budget is different. So you may need 3 people full-time on your property and you definitely don't have the budget for that. But we're here to say, okay, let's get started. What can we afford? And what's the most that we can get out of that budget? And Jim and I constantly are telling people that it's your time and let's use it as effectively as possible. But part of that might be, if you have a tight budget to work with, is to say, what are the expectations and what are things that have to get done and what are things that are maybe on a wish list for you? So we're here to work with you and put together those things, but that's something to consider for any service provider you're working with or any project that you have. You may say, oh, I'm going to renovate the clubhouse and I want, marble and all these beautiful things. Your board may be saying that to you, but you don't have the budget for that. So it's like, okay, well, what are the things we definitely want to have that are going to be with us a long time that we're comfortable spending the money on, and what maybe we have to wait until we can afford. The second item is that a week's worth of work cannot be completed in half the time. So that sounds pretty fair and reasonable to anybody, but when things are backed up, or maybe you haven't had any service or quality service in quite some time, you get in panic mode and we get calls saying, oh my God, I need you here tomorrow. And there's all these things, but this is all that they can afford. So what can you do? So we just have to be, again, realistic and saying, okay, within this time frame, this is how much can get done. Now, if you want this also to get done, we're going to have to extend the time frame. We're going to have to add additional labor, et cetera. But just kind of being open and honest about that is important. And we always try to do that with our customers, because I'm never going to tell you, oh, absolutely, we can rebuild the clubhouse in 6 months, when I know there's no way that's going to happen. I'm never going to promise you something like that. And that even goes down to just cleaning up the yard of a community, anything like that. You just need to be honest and understand kind of how much time things take. The next item is going to be open-minded to alternative schedules and programs. So for a long time, and for most of the time that I've been here in this industry and that Jim's been running the company, our schedules and our plans were dictated by what the community wanted and what the homeowners wanted and what they've always had, right? Well, these days, it's not always the best way to go. And also with staffing, that's a huge factor for us. And that's a huge consideration, is when you have staff that has to work this schedule, what is feasible and what's an attractive schedule for someone that would want to work that. So that's something that we're always thinking about too. You may want to have the pool open 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. First of all, can you afford it? Second of all, can I find staff that's going to work that schedule? Things like that. So that's something we're always looking to tweak, and just looking for our clients to be a little open-minded and kind of hear us out on some ideas that we may have. Alternatively, we have some clients that they've always had, say, a live-on super, and now they're outsourcing to us for the very first time. So they're accustomed to having someone always available, and they think they have to have that. And we say, well, look, that's a lot of money you're spending. You don't need to, we're available for emergencies, but to pay for someone to stay overnight doesn't make sense. So just kind of working through those conversations and just having an open mind again to hear from our perspective what might be a better alternative. And then lastly here is, what options do you have to stretch the budget and or plan for next year properly? So I've just given a couple examples of how we might stretch the budget. Maybe we start with kind of a smaller scaled back version of a project or a service. And we say, okay, what's the plan over the next couple months to work into that? And then just make sure that the scope of work and the expectations are set up properly. And then definitely if after a couple months or after that time period, we're seeing we really need to work towards increasing this service, making sure that we're aligned with budgeting properly, to make sure that comes into play at least for the following fiscal year if possible. Jim, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think you got it.
Cool. All right. Next would be the external factors that are going to affect the cost of service and projects that you're doing. So I'm pretty sure everybody is well aware of kind of the crisis and the insane pricing and availability for things that has come up over the past several months. First and foremost in our world is unemployment. Unemployment is at an all-time high. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily a result of jobs not being available, as we've seen in the past. It's an ability and a willingness for some of these people to come back to work and to want to take on the jobs that we all want to give them so badly. So that's first and foremost. Just the general availability of labor is extremely, extremely low, which then puts, especially for companies that are hiring for hourly workers, such as Rezkom, we have a very shallow pool of people and a very large group of companies inside and outside of our industry that are vying for those type of positions. You see, I'm sure every business that you've been in recently says they're hiring. They're starting at $15 an hour. They're listing all the things that they're offering. So there's a big push for companies like ours nationwide to increase the cost, or rather the pay that they're offering to prospective employees, as well as their current employees, to keep them on staff, and so that we're able to provide the services that everybody needs us to. Because honestly, right now, I've been telling new accounts for projects and service contracts that very likely I can't begin anything for at least 60 to 90 days, which it hurts us and it hurts the client. But that's just realistically, in order to have, I can't commit to something without the labor. So as a result of all that means that your contract prices are going to be going up as well. And it's not because we're seeing an opportunity to make more money. It's just literally to cover the cost of what the business has to kind of swallow at this point. Secondly, minimum wage and the industry standard for pay increases. So that kind of tags on to what I started talking about with unemployment. So even prior to the pandemic, here in New Jersey, the minimum wage was going to go up significantly in a pattern over the next couple of years. And for some companies, that was a big pill to swallow that would require them to, again, increase their contract costs. Otherwise, they wouldn't be making any money to have to afford minimum wage. For Rezkom, we were already performing at that level, so that necessarily didn't affect us, but just something to consider. Other companies were not in that boat. And it's fair. And again, you want to have people that are happy and making a decent wage, that they're not, struggling so much to pay their bills and to kind of live and get by here. Next would be the increased cost of doing business for companies here in New Jersey, of course, and then nationwide as well. So insurance, gas prices, there's a ton of things that everyone, I'm sure is aware of, even in your own personal lives, that are just constantly going up and have just unfortunately lately significantly increased. And unfortunately, that results in increasing costs for everybody that has to receive those services. Next would be the material pricing and availability. Again, this is not new information, but the building cost and for materials and the availability to receive them have changed drastically. They've gone up, 4 times the amount that they were 6 months ago. And then also the lead time on receiving things is triple the time that it was before. So that's something just to be aware of when you have projects that you're bidding now, that try to move those along quickly, because the contractor is no longer going to be able to hold a price for even 30 days at this point. We may not be able to say 30 days is fair, and very likely the boards are not able to maybe make those decisions and get into action as quickly as they would like. But it's important to know that those factors are going to affect the contractor's availability and ability to perform for you. And then lastly, here is going to be the schedule request outside of typical work hours or season. So most recently would be the pool openings and all the things that went into that, and all the headache and work that was put into kind of figuring out how and if to do that. So with that, again, there's all these extra new employees and positions like ambassadors and social ambassadors, pool gate attendants, additional cleanings that were not factored into the budget, and that the communities feel a tremendous amount of pressure to move forward with, to keep the community open and happy. And as a result of that, they're looking for schedules that fit their budget, that are also keeping the people happy. And sometimes that just doesn't align with the workforce that's not really available, and kind of getting people on board quickly to get you up and running. So again, as I mentioned previously, kind of being open-minded and working with your contractors on a plan that's going to work for everybody, and understanding that when we have requests for things that are atypical, either out of season or out of our normal working hours, there's an increased cost for that. The reason being is that we don't know how exactly we're going to staff that. And usually new employees coming on that are taking on those not so attractive shifts are going to want to be paid accordingly for it. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I think the most important thing here is that managers and boards understand that your contract costs are going to go up. And if you're hearing otherwise, that's not going to be reality in our opinion. We're seeing it already, and we're making adjustments, as Lauren mentioned, which leads us into the next slide, which is hiring a professional service provider. I'm assuming that by now many of you have seen which service providers were able to weather the storm, so to speak, during the pandemic. So it aligns with our slide here. Obviously, a quality service provider that takes accountability. They're consistent, and most of all, they're being honest with you about what they're able to do or not do. There's nothing worse than delivering a message and not being able to live up to that. So it's one of our things that we try to work on, and have an open dialogue with our clients and our managers, so we can avoid any kind of breakdowns there. You want to make sure that the service providers you're looking at understand the client. They're part of the CAI world. They understand the language. They know what bylaws are. They know what the difference between association and homeowner responsibilities are. And they also understand the topic that was just discussed by Lauren and Harold, but about budget restraints. You have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to modify your program to fit each client. And then, you should get a fair shot at the table to bid whatever service you're providing. The next thing would be supervision in depth. So during the course of COVID, Those companies that didn't have any depth, and I mean depth in supervision, depth in labor, to cover their service hours, they struggled and some of them failed. And it's important to make sure that the association is looking at service providers that have those qualities. You also want to have somebody that can handle service interruptions. So when schedules change because clubhouses closed and pools didn't open, many of the service providers had to modify their contracts or even accept the fact that the contracts were going to be canceled and possibly entered into at a later date. Quality service providers are able to handle those types of things. It's our slogan that usually when you're paying less, you're getting less. And in our opinion, there's a reason you're seeking a new provider. So if you're going out to bid for any other reason than to check numbers, it's usually because the service is failing. It's not meeting the expectation of the client, and therefore you should be looking for somebody with the higher quality. And of course, that comes with a price tag, but it's well worth it. And if they bring value to the association in the long run, you're going to save some money there. The next slide is on vendor relations. So it's a topic that we like to discuss with our clients, but obviously you want to have a mutual respect. You're working together towards similar goals, and it's important that both parties have that line of communication open. You want to make sure that the vendor is reliable and honest, and of course it goes both ways. We like our clients to fit that as well. And you want to include your vendors in conversations about any changes that are going to happen at the site. So sometimes we'll have committees or boards or managers discuss amongst themselves ideas that they want to move forward on, or scopes of work that they want to modify. And if the vendor that's going to be affected or vendors aren't at the table, it usually doesn't gel well. I'll use a quick example. We had an association that wanted to do a site-wide bulk cleanup, meaning they were going to provide 30-yard containers so that the folks could come on Saturday and Sunday and dump any bulk items that they had, and they were going to set this up in the clubhouse parking lot. Sounds like a great plan and a service to offer the community. But when the vendors, and this happened to be Rezkom, we were not at the table during the discussion. There was no discussion about having manpower available for those 2 days. You're not going to have folks from the community lifting heavy objects over the sidewall of a 30-yard dumpster, so you need some muscle there. And we had to do a little bit of scrambling. So although that's a simple example, those are the things you want to have your service providers at the table to discuss, and then you can avoid those last minute scrambles. And then if you're going to change anything in the scopes of work that's going to affect the service provider, it's only fair to have an open discussion about that. It may change the terms of the contract. It may change staffing and so on. So again, you just want to have them there for those purposes. Under the parameters of the service contract, you want to make sure that you are covering hours and schedules, skills required, and scope of work, of course, most importantly.
Yeah, if I could just add on to what Jim was talking about. So we actually just had an example of this, and I see it all the time. And fortunately, going back to our original slide of the depth and the supervision, Jim and I are actively involved in almost every one of our accounts, in addition to our regional management team who truly oversees the day-to-day and the staff. But we just had a meeting with a client who we've had for a long time, and there was a new manager. So, it was good to have that FaceTime with them, but the client was unhappy about a service that they felt we should be providing during our contract hours. And when it was explained to us, so, you go in and that the client's upset, and everyone has a little bit of anxiety, and we sit down and we say, oh, well, we can definitely do that. It's just not it has not been part of our regular checklist for the day or the week. But yeah, absolutely, we can do that. We just have to update the checklist, and we can start that right away. And it was like, oh, wow, like that's all it took. And it was just kind of eye-opening of how often, and I don't know if maybe the experience was that another service provider had more of like an a la carte service, but with us, with our contracts, as long as it aligns with the scope of work. So if it's a porter, it's cleaning related, or light bulbs, things like that, event setups, then and it's during the time that we're normally there, then there's nothing to change except for letting us know that you want us to do this. So it kind of was just an example of eye-opening of the client was very upset, and we very quickly could have handled that if that conversation had been had out of the gate, where instead of them assuming that we wouldn't do that or we refuse to do that, anything like that. So just kind of knowing, and that was really because the client did not understand what exactly our contract was and what the parameters were to be included for them. So.
Okay, we'll throw it back to Angela.
Yeah, that was everything that we had.
All right, thank you, all of you. All right, so we do have a few questions. The first one is for Harold. Why do associations of our size with the same or more amenities have lower monthly dues with us than us?
Well, Harold, you're on mute.
You're on, yeah.
There you go.
How about that?
Okay, that's good.
Okay, so I was saying that's a great question, and it's one that comes up so often, especially when we are holding owners' informational meetings, right? And it usually speaks to the understanding that most owners have, especially those who are not on the board, of the idea that, look, we're just paying for these, we have these list of amenities here. We're paying for that. And yet right down the road, they have more amenities, they have this, they have that, they have the other, and they're paying half what we're paying. And what we unfortunately have to sometimes explain to folks is, look, what you pay, what your dues are, as I was explaining before, is because you're a net zero budget, is really all about what your expected expenses will be. So for instance, when I was using an example, I had a board, this was last year, and they were like, look, we know you've recommended that, we increase our dues, was it 3 or 4%, et cetera, but we'd like to keep dues flat, and that's it, based on the budget you presented. I said, that's fine. I understand. Look, we've just recommended this, but how exactly, what line items do we expense on so we have a net zero budget? And they looked at me like I had 3 heads. And so that's what I explained to folks. I said, look, we don't know what's going on down the road or why other associations of your similar size or even similar amenities charge their owners what they charge. They could have a special assessment they do once or twice a year, and they have done that for the last 10 years. They could be under budgeted. I remember as an example, one board member, and he was in accounting, which was very strange, but this was several years ago. And he said to me, we're very proud of the fact that we haven't raised dues here in 10 years. I said, well, I understand that. I said, but one, you are undercapitalized. You have nothing in your reserve account, mostly because your operating deficits that you've been running every year, because you haven't raised dues, you've been taking from your reserves to plug. So exactly, I appreciate you're proud of not raising dues, but is it realistic? And as Rezkom was pointing out, it's like, what value for the dollar are you getting? Are you spending $500 but getting $100 worth of value when you could hire a professional company like Rezkom, maybe spend $1,000 but get $1,100 worth of value? So the two questions really are, one, what can you afford? And two, for any line item, expense item, and two, how to get the best value for the dollar. But so that's why it's so important to not take other associations and what they are supposedly paying out of context. You need to see their financials and see their plan.
Okay, great, thank you. This is for Jim and Lauren. What type of questions should you ask when interviewing a new service provider?
Sure, I can answer that. So this is something that we think is really important for people to know and think about, to have a list of questions to ask. And the first would be, their years of service. That's usually a pretty typical one that we get asked. How many years you've been doing this, and then specifically, as we talked a little bit about how how many years have they been working in the community association world? Because there's plenty of contractors that work in many different fields. They might be on commercial, they might be on residential, things like that. But knowing specifically how many years they've been doing the work that your community is looking for, and then making sure that they've worked on communities similar in size and makeup to yours as well is important. Proof of current insurance. So Jim was part of an Educated Business Partners discussion yesterday with JGS, and we talked about insurance, obviously, and you'd be surprised how many times we are not asked for insurance or reminded until the bill comes, and then the accountant usually is the one that says, where's the insurance? But that's something that every contractor that you're working with should have, and it should be current. It doesn't matter that it was valid a year ago. You need to make sure they have the same coverage today, because you definitely don't want to be bringing someone on the site that is uninsured. And we see it all the time. There's small communities that are self-managed. They may not be familiar with working with professionals like the contractors that are found in CAI, and they may not know that the type of insurance that's covered if, God forbid, something happened, someone was injured, or there was a loss on the property. So definitely really important in making sure that that's aligned amongst any of the same contractors that you're speaking to. Core competency. So what is the main business? So I kind of already talked about that. Understanding, and it should be important to you that the person you're talking to has a knowledge and an understanding of the way that your type of community works. If they've only ever done commercial work, even stuff that might not seem at the service level like it would matter, it does. They need to understand who the client is, the type of community that you have, how is it funded, who are the board. They need to understand that to a point to be successful with you, I think. Staffing. So number one, how many staff members do they have available to make sure that or when could they start, and how would they be staffing your community for the project or service? And then number two, how do they obtain their staffing? Because you want to make sure that anybody that's working there is above board, and that there's some kind of vetting process that goes on, even though they won't be your employees directly. Supervisions, we talked about that, of how Rezkom handles our supervision. We find that to be a huge core competency for us, and we really have found tremendous value in having that. And as the client or the manager, that's your go-to as our supervisor. You need to know that you have somebody to call if there's an issue that arises, someone doesn't show up, there's an issue with service, a scheduling conflict, anything like that. You need, who is your person to go to? Who is that going to be? And then lastly, how does the communication happen with the client? So tapping off of what I just said, if that's a supervisor, great. If they're a smaller company and they don't have multiple supervisors, just to know who your point of contact is, and what if that person's not available, what's the next option? Because in an emergency or just something that you need an answer to quickly, you want to make sure you know who that is. And it might not always be the staff member that's with you every day. There should be someone above them that you can contact.
Thanks, Lauren. This one's for Harold. How were association budgets adjusted for the costs associated with pool openings and services that were budgeted for but were never opened due to the pandemic?
Yes. Unfortunately, because of the crazy time we've had in the last year, yes, that's a question that's come up in many associations, and it's a good question, right? First, I got to start to answer that by telling folks that, look, these monies that are raised by associations, they're the owner's monies. They belong to the owner, and they are buying their services with it. That having been said, that it is sometimes logical to say, hey, look, it would be like belonging to a gym or a health club. And geez, they were closed during the pandemic, so I don't want to pay my dues for that. That's fine. But in this particular case, while the money is also the owner's, the amenities and the costs are also the responsibility of all the owners. So therefore, there are some sunk costs related to operation of pools, insurance, other types of things that have to be maintained or paid that are fixed, whether the pool is open or whether it's operating 2 hours a week or 50 hours a week. So that's why whatever is needed in terms of the expenses, yes, has to be paid for regardless. However, if because of this, because an amenity has been shut down or not able to be used, that there is then a surplus. And again, I caution folks to remember that a budget is a projection, it's not a guarantee. So that therefore, when you get to the end of your fiscal year and there is a surplus, yes, that's the owner's money. And the board, of course, the board has the discretion, can do one of several things. They can simply return the money to the owners pro rata. They can put it aside for something else, again, but what we always tell boards is whatever you're going to do, be transparent and communicate with your ownership to let them know.
Thank you. Next question, maybe the last one. We'll see how many more we can fit in. Next question is for Jim and Lauren. What information should you have available to ensure the bids you're receiving are accurate based upon your service needs?
Okay. Well, so when we talk to managers about the bid process, we like to ask them to have a certain list of items, of course. And the first thing is the bid specification. The more detailed, the better. We do also recommend that the board has approved the bid specification prior to it going out to the vendors to bid. That way, everybody's on the same page as to what the scope of work is going to be. And the time frame is also important. What's the expectation of the client? Are they looking to start this project in the next 30 days? Are they realistic in understanding that it's a 6-month process just to get plans and permits and things like that in order? So we like to see that time frame. Material choices, another thing that needs to be done ahead of time, especially now because of the lead time with materials. It's nice to have a site map in that list so that when we're coming out to bid, we know exactly where things are. We may never have been at your site, so it's good for us to have that. And then also let us know who the other professionals are that are going to be involved in the project. So you might have an engineer, a landscaper, or so on, that's going to be working in conjunction with us. And we like to know who they are, see if we have a relationship with them already. And if not, reach out to them with any questions. So those are just some of the things, but most importantly, buy-in from the board on what the scope of work and the bid specifications are going to be.
Okay, thank you. One last one for Harold. Why is our management company recommending that we raise dues more than the inflation rate?
Yeah, yes, we get that too. And it could be one of several reasons. Again, I get back to the idea that you should only be raising the amount of money that you realistically expect to have to spend for whatever your categories are. However, if, like the example I used before, that you are very proud of the fact that your association hasn't raised dues in X number of years, well, that's oftentimes the reason why a jolt, a sticker shock occurs. And again, doing the simple math, it's if inflation is running at about 2 to 3% a year, but you don't raise dues for 5 years, well, you know you've got at least a 10, possibly 15% or more with compounding jump in your dues coming. So that is one of the reasons why. Other reasons are unexpected items occur or additional services. Rezkom was speaking to this. Sometimes the board on behalf of the association determines that additional services are not only required, but preferred. Well, that's one of the reasons why. You'll have additional line items or additional costs for line items you already have.
Okay, great. Those are all the questions. Jim, Lauren, Harold, do you have anything else to add?
I think we covered quite a bit in a short period of time. So.
Okay, great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much.
All right, so we will be sharing the speaker's contact information with all attendees. So if you think of any other questions, please feel free to reach out to them. And a reminder that all webinars are recorded and they will be on our website. Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Have a good
thank you.
day.
Have a great day, guys.